Good morning, everyone. It'll be just a few minutes before we get started. It'll be just a few minutes before we get started. Good to see everyone. Okay. Okay, I guess it's time to get started. Good morning. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Happy Juneteenth. It's a day to celebrate freedom, liberation, and family. So this day celebrates the anniversary to the end of slavery, and this year that celebration has a particular significance with all the things that have happened in the last few months, with more calls for justice and equality in our communities, and so it's more important than ever to basically celebrate Juneteenth. And if you're out celebrating today, please remember to celebrate safety, practice safe social distancing, wear your face mask. We'll get into that a little bit later. As far as this event, this is my 14th installment of my virtual office hours. So people say that they really appreciate this weekly live stream address. So I'll continue to do them until the end of the shelter in place, and probably a lot longer. This Facebook Live stream event allows me to give you some updates, answer some questions, and also just provide some words of encouragement to those that are listening. So thank you for continuing to allow me to represent you and work for this city as much as I can. These are extraordinary and difficult times for many, but I hope everyone's healthy, doing well. You know, this is both mentally and physically taxing at times. Try to take care of yourself. Try to enjoy the good weather. Get outside, get in your backyard. You know, sheltering in place has helped flatten the curve. So just please keep that up. You know, it's difficult, but keep following the county health orders. Remember that you can do your part to stop the spread of the virus by washing your hands, not touching your face, maintain safe social distancing, only going out for essential items, you know, reduce the number of people that you come in contact with on a daily basis as much as possible. And of course, you know, wear your mask. It helps wearing a face covering. And of course, now it's mandatory, and we'll get into that in a few minutes too. Uh, if you need a face covering, definitely feel free to reach out. You know, I do have some additional ones that have been donated. So if you have, you know, disposable ones that you've been wearing that you put on every time you come out, please reach out. You know, the reusable face coverings that have hand sewn have been shown to be actually very good as far as preventing the spread of COVID virus. And from that standpoint, you know, if you're disposing them, I hate to consider how much new garbage is being disposed during COVID-19, but between gloves and masks and all that, but a reusable face mask is a good thing for everyone to have. So, you know, as far as before we begin this normal kind of weekly overview, for the last few weeks, I've started this weekly address with a short discussion on racism. And I'll just reiterate what I keep saying. Hate and racism have no place in our community. You know, as a white man of privilege, you know, I can't begin to understand what my black friends and, you know, the people of color in our community go through on a daily basis. But I'm here to listen about what your specific concerns are. You know, I took the mayor's pledge several weeks ago, and that pledge is really important to review, engage the public, report on what we find and hear, and then reform. And so, you know, Sunnyvale is not insulated from racism. You know, our community gathered several weeks ago, 2 weeks ago today, as a matter of fact, and it was a fantastic march. You know, so there's a march and a rally with over 2,000 people at City Hall, and it was the biggest march and rally in recent memory in at least the last 30 years. And I was there to listen and learn, and I was proud of the student organizers who worked to bring everybody together. You know, work with city staff and the Department of Public Safety to make sure that it was a safe event. And you know, it started that dialogue, and it's most important that we continue that dialogue going forward. You know, DPS continues to issue updates on what their policies are and how they've changed their policies. So they now have, you know, a nice 2-page sheet that's available online. And from the last week, as I mentioned, you know, DPS changed some of its policies, so it now, you know, outlaws the use of the carotid hold. So they have added that, so there are no holds currently. And then, of course, earlier this week, the city sent out an announcement for our first of several listening sessions. So I hope everyone has signed up for the Unity mailing list. So everyone who's interested, you know, our first listening session will happen next Thursday on June 25th at 4:30 p.m. And that will have the city manager, Kent Steffens, public safety chief No, and myself there to listen. And people can sign up to speak or just listen to the event if they want. And so if you want more information, definitely just go to sunnyvale.ca.gov/unity. and there you'll find all the information about that event. So this is the first of several events at the end of the day. We've been looking at a youth event in July. That we're also looking at one focused specifically on Spanish speakers, because there's a segment of our community that we really want to make sure that we reach out to. And so please consider joining. There'll be a YouTube link and a Facebook Live, I think, event link. So definitely, that's next Thursday. Consider being part of that. So we are now 94 days after the March 16th public health order that started the shelter in place, and it ultimately helped slow the spread of COVID-19. And since that declaration, a lot has happened, and more happens every day. I have daily conference calls and press conferences to watch or confer or advocate on your behalf. But it's really, from my standpoint, it's really important to make sure that I'm a well-informed mayor, and I'm out there, passing on information that's important to people. So let's talk a little bit about what has happened at the federal, state, county, and city level over the last week or so. Let's see, just over a week, about a week and a half ago, on Monday, we closed Murphy Avenue to car traffic. So we made a pedestrian zone, and the county health order from 2 weeks ago ultimately 2 weeks ago today, allowed outdoor seating at restaurants. So that outdoor dining experience is now active and live on Murphy Avenue, as well as several locations around the city. Certain restaurants that never had outdoor seating now have moved into the outdoor, onto their sidewalk, and some of them even into their parking lot, in order to basically re-employ servers and bring more people back into the restaurants. So not everything is takeout. And there's lots of rules around what needs to get done. All tables must be separated by 6 feet, and people, as far as how silverware is delivered, and all the measures that the servers need to go through is very restrictive. Alcohol, may be sold to patrons. It still needs to be in conjunction with food. Bars are still not allowed to be open. And so we're seeing a lot of that. And one of the things the city did was to speed up that process. So, from a city standpoint, we've cleared up, basically made that process very simple. There's a whole city website on that, a web page on that, and I posted about that this morning. And I've been advocating for the closure of Murphy Avenue for many years, and a lot of residents have. I'm overjoyed to see it finally happen. I've gotten a lot of positive response from people who've dined downtown, and there's also been a lot of feedback to restaurants that they say that their business is booming. It's hard to get reservations some nights, and most of them have moved to reservations, so that you make sure that you actually have a seat there. So if you are going there or going to any of the other restaurants, definitely make sure that you thank them, and if you're downtown especially, say what you like about it, and hopefully we'll have that as part of downtown going forward. And then last Wednesday, one of the things that the city did was open up library services, and so we're slowly opening up services within the city. Last Wednesday we opened up basically library on the plaza. So the plaza in front, from 1 to 6 p.m. is now open for pickup and placing holds of library materials, returning library materials, getting a library card, getting help from a librarian. And that's been so positive, and the response has been so good from the community that they're currently evaluating to expand it, so moving it to the evening hours, as well as they're starting to look at on the weekends as well, having a certain number of hours for library on the plaza. So hopefully that will keep expanding. From a city standpoint, the library is one of the first things that we have opened as far as people at least coming there and getting services. The public utility office to pay your water bills and such, that will actually be opening up on Monday. So that'll be the first kind of public building that people, will be able to go into, and they'll have to wear their face masks. They'll have to make sure that, they're being safe and maintaining a safe social distance. But from that standpoint, we put the appropriate measures in place at that location, and so at the City Hall Annex, that'll be one of the first things that'll be opened. And then last Friday, after this live stream event, BART had its own virtual live stream ribbon cutting, and so that was a big thing. Last Saturday, BART opened to the public, and it's been a lot of advocacy for many years, as far as trying to get BART into Silicon Valley. So two stations opened, and I'm happy to hear that one of them is the BART station in Berryessa. They're actually considering naming after Ron Gonzalez, and Ron Gonzalez was a former Sunnyvale mayor and San Jose mayor, and still is remembered as someone who was very active in our community and is still active very much in the Hispanic community in the South Bay here, and so I'm really happy. I congratulated him earlier this week on that. There's been a big push to rename that station, as well as everything that he's done in for transportation in the last 30 years. On Monday, a new county health order went in place, and this one didn't affect residents as much as it affected healthcare. And so healthcare systems, and we've heard stories, and as as a mayor, I've been hearing stories for a while now about people trying to get an appointment to get tested and not being approved for testing by the healthcare system. And so that was one of the reasons why I work so hard with the other 15 mayors in the county to work with the county to make sure that testing and tracing is moving forward, and how do we partner on that. And I'm happy to report that next Monday we should, or sometime in the next day or so, we'll have information about free testing that'll be happening in Sunnyvale and Murphy Park early next week. And the day and time hasn't been finalized yet, but that'll be put out there as soon as that's available. But the new health order that went in place on Monday forced large healthcare systems to start immediate testing of some patients that have been trying to get approval for testing but haven't. So it forced them to test all patients with coronavirus symptoms, of course, all patients who have had close contact with people that have tested positive for coronavirus, and as well as patients at high risk of exposure. So if you think that you're at high risk and might have been exposed, that was important. But really it came down to several things around if you were a medical worker, a grocery store employee, essential workers that might have been exposed, and or anyone actually who participated in some of the racial justice protests over the last few weeks, they can go to their healthcare system and say, I think I might have been exposed, I want to be tested. And this order basically put additional pressure on them to make sure that they approve that. Definitely I've heard stories of people going through and ultimately having to lie to their provider because they were afraid that they might have been exposed, but they weren't showing any symptoms. And that's the important thing, that making sure that we get our testing numbers up so that we're showing, to see how much spread of the virus we're actually having. From a county standpoint, we wanted to reach 4,000 tests a day, and we're above 2,000 now. I think 2,500 was the last count I saw. That being said, it's not enough, and so making sure that we have more of that, more testing, and putting pressure on the healthcare providers to do that testing is part of that. And then on Monday, and this is a minor thing, you might have seen the fences go down next to Whole Foods in the AMC Theater downtown. So, there's now bike racks and benches and, a very interesting sidewalk with glass in it and all that, very colorful. It's actually really good to kind of walk through there if you get a chance. There's a parking that you can get closer to the parking structure and see some of the upgrades that they've done to that. So it's getting closer, and definitely visit it if you get a chance. On Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday, AMC announced that they will be starting reopening some of their theaters July 15th. And so, that's an important step, and it depends on what the state, what the county requirements are as far as theaters are concerned, what stage, from our Santa Clara County, it's what stage we're currently in. And currently we don't allow, indoor movie theaters. We don't allow indoor restaurant seating for that matter. And so, once it's allowed, then hopefully AMC will be, opening up here in downtown, you know. And as far as AMC, they also came out that they won't require customers to wear face masks when it reopens this summer. Of course, it all depends on what the local uh, authority, county or state requires from a face mask standpoint. But AMC decided that they wouldn't. They didn't want to be drawn into the political controversy. So they thought forcing face masks wasn't important. That being said, they will be selling them for those who want them, and then we'll talk about the state order in just a moment. Actually, let's go ahead and get to that. Yesterday, Governor Newsom issued a statewide order to require face masks in high risk settings, and so that has been implemented by different cities and different counties around the Bay Area, around California, in different ways and different measures. And from a Santa Clara County standpoint, we didn't require masks at all places at all times. And what the new state order puts in place is a lot more restrictive. So first, Californians must wear face masks, face coverings when they are in situations of when they're in any indoor public space. So that was somewhat covered already. When they're obtaining services from a healthcare sector, so if they're in a pharmacy, medical clinic, laboratory, dental office, blood bank, veterinary clinic, face masks should always be worn. And I think all the hospitals that I've heard already had those measures in place just to prevent, reduce exposure to the healthcare workers as well as other patients that might be there. And then when you're waiting for public transportation uh, or taxi or private car service or ride sharing, or also if you're a driver for any of those services, uh, you need to be wearing face coverings. If you're engaging in work, whether or not it's the workplace or performing work offsite, when you're interacting with people or members of the public, when you're in any space visited by members of the public. So if you're cleaning up the inside of a restaurant where people are allowed to do takeout, that's people need to be wearing their face coverings. And I've seen, that's been a common practice as far as that's concerned. When you're um, in any room or enclosed area where other people are present and unable to physically distance. And then, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, when you're driving or operating any public transportation, taxi, private car, Uber, whatever, you know, no passenger, even when no passengers are present, uh, face coverings are strongly recommended since it's a common area as far as that's concerned. And then, while you're outdoors in public spaces, uh, when you can't maintain a distance of 6 feet, um, then if that distance is not feasible, then you should be wearing your face coverings. And they've changed, the exemptions. And so the county had certain exemptions. It used to be, children under 7 uh, or 6 and under couldn't, didn't have to wear a face covering. What the new state order is far more restrictive, and so they only exempt children under age 2 and under. So that's a quite a big change, especially for parents who have been trying to educate, their children, and over a certain age, especially, be under age 6, so 6 to 3. It's difficult to have them, wear their mask, and so that is now a state order. Of course, people with um, mental health or developmental disability that prevents them from wearing a face covering, persons who are hearing impaired, which I was glad to see. If you can't see someone's mouth and it's an essential for them to communicate, asking someone else to remove their face covering so that they could actually read and communicate becomes very important. And then persons who wearing a face covering would create a risk for that person related to their work. And so that's just kind of determined at a local level, and state regulators will look at kind of that workplace safety sort of thing. And then persons who are seated in a restaurant or other establishment while they are not eating and drinking. So if they're just lounging, they should be also wearing a face mask. So when you're doing outdoor dining, you should have your face mask handy. As far as on Murphy Avenue, on other locations around the city. And then if you're engaged in outdoor work or recreation, such as swimming, walking, biking, hiking, if you're alone or with members, family members, and as long as you can maintain safe social distancing, you don't need to be wearing a mask. But if you're on narrow trails, hiking, definitely having a mask handy, and when you're having to pass people, having that mask ready to go is really important. And some Bay Area jurisdictions already had stricter mask guidelines in place. San Francisco and Alameda County required mask anytime when you're outdoors and within 30 feet of other people. So I was happy to see that the state order wasn't that restrictive, but especially looking at Southern California and what's been happening there as far as their numbers, and their numbers have gone up quite a bit. It is kind of interesting to see how well they'll follow the new state order. So because Southern California was one of the first areas to open up, and they've seen a very large uptick in both the number of cases as well as the number of people that have been dying because of COVID-19. So that has changed kind of what the world is yesterday, and I'll be talking I'll be hearing from the county health department later this afternoon on their reaction to that, and what goes on. So anyway, that's where things stand, at least from the last week, and from the county dashboard. And so I try to give this update every week. New cases, had a spike about a week ago, but they've kind of leveled out a little bit. There were, I think there are 3,600, I think 3,600 cases. Sorry, 3,300 cases, more than 300 cases in the last week. So it's from last Friday to this Friday, it's about 300 new cases, which was about twice as much as the week before. So a week ago we had 150 cases over the week. This week we had 300 cases. So there has been an uptick, but looking at the latest numbers, it's settled down a little bit. San Jose has had 2,195 cases. That's 200 cases up from last week, and Sunnyvale has 184 cases, up 16 from last week. So, we're seeing, a good number of cases, and part of that has to do with testing. Some people are asymptomatic, and finally, when they finally get tested, definitely it's showing that they have been exposed, and they have ultimately have had COVID or have COVID-19. There isn't widespread testing uh, for everyone yet. It's like from a COVID-19 and from an antibody test, which most people want. There's the standard test of whether or not you have COVID-19 at this very moment, and so that's one of the things of making sure that we have enough testing around the county to make sure that if the spike continues to go up, if we see more spikes as things open up and people are out at rallies or people are at dining establishments, we'll find out what whether or not we actually have appropriate hospital availability. And right now, hospital availability looks really good. We have our average of tests per day keeps going up, which is really positive. But there is still a worry, and making sure that we reduce the spread of COVID-19 as much as possible is really critical. And please do whatever you can to make sure that we are preventing that spread. And there actually be, I'll end a few minutes early today, because at 10 a.m. there will be a live stream event from Santa Clara County Health this morning to answer questions that they've received over the last week, as well as have people ask live questions. So I'll try to end before 10 a.m. Fingers crossed, so that you can switch from listening to this live stream to the county one to hear their latest issues and find out what's going on at a county level directly from county health officials and staff. Okay. And I've been doing, a lot of advocating. I continue discussions with the county supervisors and other regional leaders. We should, part of that is exactly what I said before, is getting more testing and tracing. For those that signed up for tracing, the county is trying to get back with you. I appreciate your sign up. They've had more than 3,000 people sign up, which is fantastic. They've basically chosen their first, I think, 900 of those to immediately go through the program, going through the education, making sure that they understand the whole process of tracing. If someone's affected by COVID-19, tracing what contacts they've had within the community, and making sure that those people then also get tested. So that's getting the tracing moving forward was important, and then advocating for testing. And so we'll see, hopefully before the end of the day, an announcement as far as when the testing is going to be coming to Murphy Avenue or Murphy Park. And so we'll have more information about that on the city website, and I'll be posting it, of course, on my Facebook page. I think it's important that anybody be able to be tested, and so the county testing is free and available to anyone. And that's one of the things that if you for restaurant workers, for healthcare workers, for anyone in the community that has gone to a rally, making sure that they feel safe and aren't exposing their family members or other people to COVID-19 is really critical. And then I've been also, talking about a commute-free tomorrow. And this is regional leaders, different organizations. They're talking about how we take advantage of, the less traffic that we have right now. How can we get certain people, ultimately working from home as much as possible, and kind of what's the new normal going forward. And that to me is really critical. Setting those policies in place, putting those incentives in place to make sure that people don't have to drive every day to work if they don't have to, making sure that we still have an active economy, but what makes sense from our region standpoint, as well as, most importantly from an environmental standpoint. It's taking advantage of this, whatever, reducing greenhouse gases emissions, which is very much tied directly to traffic, trying to get people, if they're coming to work, to use alternative transportation. And then if they don't have to come to work, enabling them to work remotely as much as possible. Let's see what else. Let's go ahead and get to questions. One of the questions I got from several people is, what happened to the benches at the golf courses? You know, I'm doing 9 holes of golf, or at Sunken Gardens or Sunnyvale Golf Course, and there's no place to sit down as I'm going through. And so some of the thank you for bringing this to my attention. This is part of the thing that, you are the residents, and we have a city of 150,000 plus people, are the eyes and ears of what's happening in our community. And so if there's an issue, if there's a question, always feel free to reach out. Some of the initial recommendations from the PGA for golf courses was to remove high-touch surfaces, including benches. So when we were opening up the golf courses, that was, following PGA suggestions, our city staff removed those benches. Now that the health orders are less restrictive, the benches will be reinstalled. So, the benches at Sunken Gardens are planned to be reinstalled tomorrow, and then Sunnyvale Municipal benches will be installed next week. And so that to me is, important, that, if you're out walking, especially on a hot day, being able to sit down for a few minutes as you're out for a walk. And that's one of the things that golf has often been compared to, is out for a walk with swinging club every now and then. It's important that you actually be able to sit down as you're out on the golf course. So that is being handled, and thanks for everyone who pointed that out to me. And then I passed that on to city staff, and it's got, somebody got on top of it. Several people ask what's happening with the Sunnyvale Small Business Grant Program. So we've talked about SV Cares. So SV Cares was, first, council set aside $600,000 to start a matching grant program for small businesses. So this would be grants from $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 to small businesses within the city, and this could be restaurants or other small businesses. And we were happy to see, Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, J. Paul, Lockheed, Intuitive Surgical, all step up to match that and actually surpass that $600,000. And so we have more than $1.3 million that people applied for. And ultimately, we had 635 applications. And so the Enterprise Foundation, which is a local nonprofit that supports businesses, the city partnered with them to go through that application process. And we had a 6 days where we had the application open, and we were receiving those applications. We're now going through processing them. I approved the congratulations letter a few days ago. So we're getting ready to put out those new grants in the next week or so. So notifications and money should be going out, and hopefully that will help some of the businesses that have had such a difficult time during COVID-19 and the last 13, 14 weeks. I've heard from multiple people, when will the Fremont pool reopen? So we don't have an exact date yet. And so part of this issue is California Swim Center, which was the contractor for Fremont, the Fremont High School pool specifically. They decided to back out at the last minute. So they were supposed to be opening, and we've been discussing and kind of pushing them, when are you going to be opening? It was being allowed at the county level, the county health order allowed it. And so, making sure that our residents have access to that pool was seen as, okay, it's normal business, don't open the lock, don't, according to the county order, you can't open the locker rooms, but, people come prepared, they can actually utilize the pool for lap swim. Uh, that being said, uh, late last week or middle of last week, uh, they said that we don't see a way forward with during COVID-19, and so now, city staff is pivoting to try to figure out what they can do, and we're working on different options. One of the biggest issues is we need to set up a reservation system because you can't have people there and waiting. You have to basically people have to reserve a specific time slot. Maybe a 45-minute time slot. People come in, and end 15 minutes before, so they have like a, 9:05 to 9:50 time slot, and then basically the next person can come in sometime just before their allotted time. And so, that's part of the issue is setting that up. Also figuring out, what city staff will be there to act as lifeguards. We weren't expecting to have to hire anyone for the summer as far as those positions are concerned. So, we're trying to deal with all those sorts of issues and trying to go forward from a city standpoint of what makes most sense. One of the other questions I got was, what is happening at the old Michaels? So, Michaels closed its location on Hollenbeck and moved, to farther down El Camino, to the Safeway Plaza, closer to Wolf Road. And so the old Michaels, there's construction going on, and ultimately the owner of the former Michaels is subdividing that property or subdividing that space into smaller stores. He was unable to find a large store to kind of replace that location, and so ultimately it will be smaller stores. In that shopping mall has that shopping center already has multiple small stores and restaurants, and so this will be adding to that. Let's see what other questions I have. Several people have asked, is it possible to have our Wednesday night outdoor band dances sometime in September, October? It'd be appreciated and bring a lot more people downtown. A lot of this is dependent upon the county health order. We'll see where we are in September, October. Downtown Association is already looking at having music, kind of ambiance music, maybe strolling musicians at different points, not like a big concert, but especially now that the street is being utilized by a lot of tables, things have to change quite a bit. So and they're also looking at having movies, either most likely at Plaza del Sol, so that people can hopefully by August or September space out accordingly with their lawn chairs and see movies. So that's still going forward, which is really important. Let's see what else we have. Oh, I saw, I've seen graffiti in my neighborhood. What can I do? And so this is an ongoing, I get this question every month or so. If you see graffiti, neighborhood preservation will work to make sure that gets fixed. So if you go to the Sunnyvale website, sunnyvale.ca.gov, and at the top there's Sunnyvale Access, so there's a Sunnyvale Access link. One of the things there is to report graffiti. So if you go through there and report that location, neighborhood preservation will work with the property owner to make sure that gets fixed as quickly as possible. So that's always something that if you see graffiti in our neighborhood, you can always do. Let's see. Are we, no, let's see. Well, I live within 600 feet of Fremont Corners Village Center, and I'm looking forward to redevelopment. I haven't heard anything from the city recently about their project, but I also haven't heard anything about El Camino Real specific plan. It seems like the process for both keep getting pushed out. Do you know what the new schedule is? And so this is an issue, especially during COVID-19. The El Camino El Camino Real specific plan was supposed to uh, was supposed to be moving forward a lot sooner. So the El Camino draft EIR was, and that's the environmental impact report, was supposed to be released in the spring and then approved in the summer. COVID-19 has pushed things out at least a quarter, and I've been, dealing with city staff on how to do appropriate outreach, and the Zoom meetings are working to some degree, but there is that digital divide for some people. So we're trying to make sure that people have appropriate means to give feedback to whatever those issues are. And so that's El Camino Real specific plan and the EIR. As far as Fremont Corners, uh, last I heard, there were the developer of at least one of those sites wasn't ready to evaluate that whole node and just wanted to move forward with housing. And so, I'll see. I haven't heard recently what that plan is, and so, definitely with COVID-19, a lot of construction has been put on hold. Community outreach has been put on hold. So we're working with those, we're working with all the developers. Let me see what I can find out about Fremont Corners and what's happening there. Definitely, part of that property is the 24-hour fitness, which initially said that they were never, that was an active location. That being said, 24-hour fitness is going through its own issues with bankruptcy right now. And so figuring out how they'll come out of that bankruptcy, I think they just went into bankruptcy protection Monday or Tuesday of this week. And so they will come out of that bankruptcy, but that might be a location that ends up being closed. Who knows? We'll see more later. Um, I'm curious about how crowded Murphy Avenue has been since outdoor dining started. Has it been a problem with people walking too close to dining tables? I've heard some cases about that, and I've been talking to the downtown association on how we put reminders up and how we put, barriers. So some restaurants have put, basically chain link fence or a little fence or some sort of barrier, next to their tables to make sure that people don't get too close. So that has been an issue. I'd say mainly on like a Friday or Saturday night. I hear during the week it's actually working out, fairly well. But on the weekend, definitely it is might be an issue. But that has been brought up to the downtown association, and they're working with the restaurants to make sure that's as safe as possible as far as that's concerned. Uh, is there a specific exclusion to the mask requirement for when you're exercising? So for now, yes, that's an important thing. I go on a morning run, every morning uh, during shelter in place, and it's my longest continuous days. It's my longest streak of continuous days running ever. But I always carry a mask with me. That is important to do. That being said, it isn't being required if you're hiking, if you're biking, if you're running. You should have it near you. But if you can't, if you're at a location and someone's within 6 feet, you should be putting your mask on. So that is an issue. I follow several running websites, and what they're suggesting is wearing a bandana around your neck so that you can pull that up over your nose if you're getting close to someone. So that is another option if you're out running. Lots of people are asking about gifts to DPS. You can email the city manager about that. And it's not gifts just to public safety, it's gifts to any city employee. And, it's to make sure that, there isn't any quid pro quo. There isn't, any semblance of, influencing what city staff does. And I understand, there's a lot of people that would love to give, cookies to public safety, or give, a cake to a city worker that they really like. This is one of the issues as far as the city, and that also gets rid of any impropriety that, if a developer gave gift baskets and, at my high tech company, when it always come to the holidays, we would always get, gift baskets from all these subcontractors and all these other businesses that we dealt with, mainly to keep your business and things of that nature. Right now, it's city policy that, and I brought that up with the city manager earlier this week. You know, can that policy be changed? Right now, he thinks it's a really good policy, and it gets rid of any vision for impropriety in our community. And I understand, it would be really nice to thank our public safety officers for what they're doing. What you can do is conceivably contribute to the Sunnyvale PAL program. So uh, um, the Police Activities League helps students that and teens that are at risk. It gives them a positive influence in their life. And if you really want to give back to the community, donating your money to that organization will really make a big difference. So that's one thing I've talked to the chief about in the past, and that's always an opportunity. Let's see. Is the Art and Wine Festival canceled? Yes, it is. And there's been, the chamber puts on 2 events every year, one of which was the Murphy Awards. And luckily, the Murphy Awards happened before the shelter in place. So it happened in February of this year, at the end of February. And the other event is the Art and Wine Festival. I don't see festivals happening anytime soon, as far as that's concerned. So at least for this year, it's been canceled. They're looking at maybe to having some small event in the fall, but even that is questionable at this time. One of the other things that changed recently is Don Eagleston, who is president and CEO of the chamber. He ended up retiring. So after 10 years, and I want to thank Don and everybody who knows Don. So he's moved on, and that organization, it's interesting to be a chamber right now where so many businesses are in need and not having, an easy way through the COVID-19. So, the chamber is going through some issues, but I'm sure it'll make it through. And I'm really proud of, they've been trying to build community of the restaurants around the city, and that's what I've been doing also. So you might have seen, I finally put all of my restaurants in that I've been doing. So I'm up to 92 restaurants as of yesterday that I've went to every day, doing a different restaurant review. And so from that standpoint, 92 different restaurants within our city. People seem to enjoy that, and the chamber has been, reaching out to those same restaurants, trying to see if there's things that they need. Is there some ability to have them work together to buy supplies, or to buy cleaning supplies, or face masks, or hand sanitizer. Providing those services is really important. So I'm sorry to see Don go, but definitely the chamber will bounce back, and they're actively looking for the next CEO president. One question that I mentioned last week: will we have National Night Out this year? So it's normally National Night Out is normally the first Tuesday in August, and it's where neighborhoods basically get together and on a Tuesday night and try to build community. And this has been an ongoing event every summer. And public safety, sends, fire trucks and the motorcycle officers and canine officers around the city to interact with residents, interact with kids, and talk to them. But this year, August is out as far as I know. It's been, from a national standpoint, they say that they're not going to do it. We're still trying to evaluate whether or not the new proposed October 6th date will actually be the new date. And so National Night Out, is kind of in transition, and so we'll see where that goes. Let's see what else we have. What are the plans for the Macy's building? So the Macy's building, so the downtown specific plan is moving forward. We'll finalize that, I think, sometime in July. And one of the plans is, and part of that is the downtown specific plan figures out how much residential office space and um, retail space will be downtown. And it's not just the Macy's building and kind of the unfinished Macy's parking lot. It's also the parking lot at Sunnyvale and Wad, and the old post office that have all three of those developers have raised questions about what their visions are for those sites. And so the environmental impact report should be approved later this year, hopefully July, and then we'll finally see what the breakdown is for the downtown specific plan as far as what the ratios are for housing and retail and office space. So that's still in transition, and definitely kind of moving forward fairly well. And as opposed to the El Camino specific plan, the Moffett Park specific plan continues to move forward too. But it's hard to keep all the outreach going in a reasonable fashion during the shelter in place. I think that's about it. We're almost to 10 o'clock, so I think it's important, and especially for those of you that actually want to hear the actual healthcare professionals or the Department of Public Health talk about what the new measures are, what's happening at a county level. So I'll end before 10 o'clock today, just so that you can get off of this live stream and then move on to the county live stream if you wish, and if you have another hour of your time. So thank you again for joining me this week. It's an interesting, it's always interesting. There's always things happening, as far as we did, I'm hoping that people continue to be safe in their homes. It's important that I'm proud of Sunnyvale's response. I had several calls this week to talk with like the League of Women Voters. I talked last week with Senator Hill during a session town hall that he had, and I'm proud of Sunnyvale's response to the pandemic. And if you're there out, definitely whatever you do, help your neighbor. Make or share masks, share homemade cookies and bread. Continue to build our community during the shelter in place. I'm really happy to see the response that and the stories that I hear from our residents. I'm proud to see Sunnyvale residents pulling together to help their neighbors and strangers and build a better community. So if you're out on a walk, wave, say hello from a safe social distance. People miss that social interaction. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together. We'll get through this together. So thanks for listening. And until next week, stay safe. And I hope you enjoy this. So take care. Goodbye.